all Americans are divorcing and all Americans are living in sexual union without marriage and all of this, but it is not true. There are millions of Americans, like my husband and I, who believe in marriage, who believe in sexual purity, who believe in God's gift of sexuality to human beings for two purposes, for bonding and for babies. And so there's a side that you see in the culture, and then there's a side that you never see. Those human beings who are living and working their daily lives in accordance with God's call to us. And there's a lot of hope in my country. And there's a lot of hope in yours as well. Babies are good. That's Juliet on the day she was born. And we have a whole millions of people in my country who love babies, who never have abortions, sterilization, contraception, and who have big families. Most of my best friends have 10, 11, even 15 children. And and you have to have a school bus to drive all these children around. But also, birthdays are good, right? There's Juliet and Elizabeth of 1 month ago. They share a birthday. And we believe that birthdays are good, and everyone should have a birthday. But not everyone believes this. And so we have created a new organization called Healing the Culture. And I want to just read a little bit. This comes from Ecclesiastes. I know there's nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live. All of us, whether we are Christian or Hindu or Buddhist or Muslim or even no religion at all of us, I think, can agree on a common ground. Every human being desires happiness. Yes? We all want to be happy. The problem is that your culture in India, like my culture in America, does not do a good job anymore of defining what happiness really means. And so people are beginning to live for the wrong things. They're beginning to define their meaning, their purpose, in terms of things that are beneath them as human beings. And this is causing a tremendous disease in the soul. A disease that is infecting not only the person, but their family. Not only their family, but their neighborhood. And not only their neighborhood, but the greater society at large. And it is being driven by very powerful people who have been seduced by materialism, by glamour, by ego gratification, by power, by popularity, and by control. And these people have set the stage, so to speak, for the rest of us by promoting through the great media of television and newspaper and music and art and entertainment and advertising and fashion industry, etc. They have set the stage for what the rest of us hear day in and day out about what is important. And so my organization, the reason why we founded Healing the Culture was because there are a lot of good people involved in pro-life evangelization who are working to change the law, which is important. And there are many good people in the pro-life movement who are working to educate on fetal development, what the baby looks like in the womb and what it can do, right? Which is important. And there are a lot of people who work on counseling, right? Post-abortion counseling and pregnancy counseling. And many people who spend their lives educating on what abortion does and what it looks like and the psychological complications and the physical complications, right? But there wasn't anybody in the pro-life movement who was explaining to people why they should be pro-life in the first place. Not just what to believe, but why. That abortion and euthanasia and other attacks against innocent human life actually offend against our own dignity as human beings, cause us to live beneath ourselves, make us profoundly unhappy, and confuse us about what success means, what quality of life really is, what love is all about, what the purpose and meaning of suffering is. And so we've built a philosophy that helps people to understand these in deeper ways. Now, most, if not all of you, are going to graduate to become doctors, right? And so you will see many people who will be hurting, many people who will be pregnant and hurting deeply. And my hope is that you will be able to identify more than just their physical problems, but identify their spiritual problems, their philosophical problems, the struggle they have in their heart that drives them to want an abortion in the first place. And you might work to heal that as well. So if I might just spend a little while with you, I want to go through this program and then ask you if you have any questions. St. Thomas Aquinas is a great saint in the Catholic faith, and he explains that man's last end is happiness. It's what everybody desires, and everything you want in life, you want for happiness, right? You want to become a doctor because you believe it will make you happy. You want to have a good chicken biryani at nights with your family because you believe it will make you happy. And you want to go home for your holidays because that makes you happy. You want to get married because it will make you happy. You want to get a good job. You want to have children. You want to get the new motorbike or the latest iPhone because you think it will make you happy. Happiness is the one thing we all want for its own sake. And if we don't define that term well, we get into very big trouble. We end up listening to what the media says about happiness. Time magazine that tells us happiness is a chemical. And if you don't have the right balance of chemicals, you take drugs and you will find happiness. National Geographic that tells us that happiness is about being in secluded places of the planet, where you can be free from all the stress of traffic and noise and all this chaos, that's happiness. But it never really none of these really get to the issue in the heart of what we need to be deeply fulfilled as human beings. And it's not a place, and it's not the absence of traffic, and it isn't even a chemical. It's something more profound than that. It's a realization of who you are and why you were made and how special and unique and important you are. We even sometimes see ministries of happiness. Right? An Indian state that created a ministry of happiness to make sure everyone in the state was happy. But you can't make people happy. Happiness is something inside. So what is happiness and how do you define it? This is Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was a German Jew in Germany during the Nazi regime. And he was also a psychologist. Has anyone ever studied Viktor Frankl? He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in it he talks about his experience when he was, as a Jew, taken to the Nazi concentration camps. And he was stripped of everything, his clothing, his belongings, his family, his money, everything he owned and possessed. And he was forced to work in a labor camp. And in order to keep his sanity, he did what psychologists do. He observed people. And he learned that the camp was made up of two different kinds of people. There were some prisoners who defined their meaning in life in terms of something that was material, finite, concrete, tangible, something you could see and taste and touch and hear and smell, like where they would get their next meal from, or avoiding the hits of the guards, or avoiding the gas chambers, right? Or making sure they had a place to sleep, or maybe even something a little longer term, like belief or placing their hope that the Allies would liberate them by Christmas time. But when the Allies did not liberate them by Christmas time, those people died. They literally died. They gave up, lost hope, despaired, and died of their injuries and illnesses. Or just gave up altogether and were sent to the gas chambers. But Viktor Frankl noted that there was a different kind of person in the camp. There were those prisoners who defined their meaning, their self-worth, their purpose in life in terms of something that was intangible, right? Not physical, not material, something transcendent, something that goes beyond the material, such as their faith in God, or their love for other human beings, their care and compassion for prisoners who were suffering more than they were, the self-sacrifice they could get to give up places to sleep for others who were younger or older than they were, even forgiveness of the guards who were harming them. And these people survived in far greater numbers. And Viktor Frankl concluded, meaning is everything. It makes the difference between life and death. And if you encounter a patient in your practice who is suffering because he's making a mistake about purpose and meaning in life, you cannot fix that with a drug. You cannot fix that with a therapy. You cannot fix that with a surgery. You can only fix that through helping to convince the person that there is more to life than what they are living for. I believe that abortion and euthanasia and these other attacks against innocent human life happen because people are making a mistake about happiness. So what is happiness? There are basically 4 levels, 4 different kinds of happiness. And if there's nothing else that you get from my talk today, I hope it's at least this, because this is the most important part. Every man desires all 4 levels of these happiness levels. And all of them are important. None of them are unimportant. They're all important, but they are prioritized. And if we live for the lower levels, we will be profoundly unhappy and we will have a very unhealthy culture. If we live for the higher levels, we will be fulfilled. We will be able to withstand great suffering because we will have a purpose and a meaning that is deeper than ourselves, and we can build a healthy culture. The first level of happiness is very tangible, right? It's the most basic. It requires very little from you. It doesn't affect very many people besides you, and it is very short term. Physical pleasure and material possessions. The kind of happiness that comes from eating something that tastes good, or the warm sun, or a back massage, right? Or maybe a fast car, and speeding down the highway and the wind blowing in your hair, or maybe a sexual encounter, with somebody. These are the things that we would call physical pleasure and possession. Okay? Happiness level 1, filling up your physical needs, satisfying your physical needs, is important because you have a body. God made you with a body and you need to fulfill it. But the problem is that human beings can choose to live for level 1 as if it were their purpose. There's healthy level 1. This is a picture of me experiencing level 1. It was the first night after Juliet was born that she slept the whole night through, and I got a good night's sleep, right? I woke up, I was refreshed, I was ready for the day. My husband took the picture, right? Juliet looks like she could have more sleep, and it was a good day. That's a healthy level 1. But you can make the mistake, anyone can make the mistake of choosing to live for level 1 as the most important thing in life. And some people do that. And I'm not here to tell you that we should force people to choose the level of happiness I think is the most important. But I do think we should be warning people. If you choose to live for level 1, you will probably end up in crisis. And that crisis is that we start to get attached to material things. This is my daughter 5 years later on her 5th birthday, and she gets $10 for her birthday, and now she can buy a toy with it, right? And you see the level 1 look in her eye. I hope I don't see that look in her eye, right? 10 years from now when she is a grown-up, an adult, and that she becomes attached to those physical things. Because if she does, she will likely experience boredom. Eventually, tangible things become boring to us. And then we become restless. Like our lives aren't really going anywhere. And then we begin to experience low self-esteem and feelings like we're living beneath ourselves, right? Human beings need more than the material. Why? Because we have a soul, and that spiritual dimension of ourselves needs to be fulfilled as well. And so there is happiness level 2. Let me see. Happiness level 2 is the kind of happiness that comes from ego gratification. It's a little higher than level 1 because it moves beyond simply the tangible. Right? It's longer lasting, it affects more people, and it's deeper. It uses more skill and power and talents and abilities of mine. And so it involves ego high and ego gratification. And you can get an ego high in one of 4 ways. You can experience happiness level 2 through success or achievement. Right? You earn your degree as a doctor, you hold up your diploma, somebody takes a picture, you're smiling, you're happy, right? I did it, Mom, I did it. I'm a doctor now, right? And that will make you're already smiling thinking about it right now. Right? That's the kind of happiness. Second way you can get it is through being better than others, right? You graduate, you become a doctor, you go to a hospital, and you become the head of the department, right? Now you are in charge, and the other physicians, have to do what you say, and you set the standards and the policies, right? And so now you are better than the other doctors. Maybe you graduate with honors, right? You have the best marks in your class. Or, any way that you can imagine that you're better than others. This is a level 2 ego gratification, having more than others, having the competitive advantage. A third way you can experience it is through power or control. And the fourth way would be popularity, or being admired, or being liked by others. These are all ways we can obtain an ego high. And again, there's nothing wrong with level 2 in itself. This was the first day that I figured out how to use the baby carrier without Juliet falling through it onto the floor, right? And so I felt success, level 2 achievement. I did it all by myself, and my husband takes another picture, right? And it's good. Nothing wrong with level 2 by itself. But the problem with level 2, again, is if we choose to live for it as our purpose, our meaning in life. If it becomes our end instead of a means to a greater end, we will end up angry, right? Have you ever known someone who is a level 2 person? That's their objective, that's their goal in life. Or maybe you've watched a movie where one of the characters is like that, very focused on their own ego or their own success or their own power or control. Right? They tend to be very angry people because it is never good enough, right? It's never good enough. And they're angry at you because you're in their way. And they're angry at God because God didn't make them more powerful. And they're angry at themselves most of all because they can't ever seem to be satisfied with what they have. And then this leads to jealousy of other people who have more, which leads to contempt of people who have less. And then eventually this turns into aggression, constantly having to prove and to step over weak and vulnerable people. And then I become suspicious of other people all the time because I think you're trying to steal my glory. And I have anxiety every night about how I'm going to measure up tomorrow. And it ends up leading to resentment. I resent my life because I'm not happy, and I resent you because you're happy and you shouldn't be, because you're not as good at anything as I am, right? And so we find out that level 2 is really not happiness. It ends up being a perfect description of hell. This is what I think hell is. Human beings who have died grounding or founding their meaning in life in terms of the material, the tangible, the ego, the power, the control, never learning to let go of that and always seeking the self ahead of the other. So what do? One of two things. You can either end up, I think, in despair, like the people in the concentration camp that Viktor Frankl observed, or you can choose something higher, more meaningful for your life. Skip that. Happiness level 3. Happiness level 3 is again deeper than level 1. It uses more of your powers. It's longer lasting. Right? Level 2 can last you maybe all week because you won a competition in your class, or maybe a sports team won and you're cheering. But after a while, it doesn't matter anymore, right? Level 3 is doing good beyond yourself for someone else, and it's longer lasting. You may heal a patient one day and save them from death. And that joy of knowing that you helped that person may last you the rest of your life. And that's good. And happiness level 3 is also, it's longer lasting, it's deeper, but it affects more people beyond yourself. So we would say it is more fulfilling, more worthy of your time than simply level 1 and level 2. Level 3 is the good I do beyond myself for the benefit of someone else, not for my own sake, not for my glory, not for my power, not for me to be more popular, people like me, but for your sake. And you can experience level 3 in 5 different ways. We call them the 5 transcendentals. 5 ways to experience happiness beyond the material. And those ways are truth. We seek the truth, right? We want knowledge so we can understand ourselves in the world, so we can pass on that knowledge to the young so that they can do better with their lives, so that they can avoid danger and live healthy lives. We want love. That's the second. What is love? Love is acting on the desire to do a good for the other, whereby doing a good for you is just as easy, if not easier, than doing the good for me. That's love. Doing the good for you is easier than doing the good for me. And we long for that. We want to do the good for others, and we want others to do the good for us. Third way, We seek justice. Human beings want things to be fair, equal. And when we see someone who is being treated with injustice, it makes us angry. It makes us indignant. It makes us want to stand up and fight for that person. It makes us want to stand up and fight for ourselves when we are being treated unjustly. A fourth way, we desire beauty. Right? Every admiration and awe of beauty, natural beauty, right? In the landscape, right? In the sky, in the sunset, in the ocean. We desire beauty in our art, in architecture, in music. And we desire to create beauty as a way of inspiring people to something greater than themselves, something bigger. You walk by a beautiful mosque or a gorgeous cathedral, right? And it makes you think of God and how great He is and how powerful and awesome He is and how He made us for Himself. And it calls us to something bigger, right? And the fifth way we would call home. Every human being desires a sense of home. To be at one with everything that is. To be accepted and welcomed, a part of community, a part of family. And level 3 is good. All 5 of these are very, very good. We can get them in so many different ways. And you becoming a doctor someday. There's my husband with my daughter Juliet, and our doctor gave us free medical care for the first 6 months of Juliet's life because she knew that we were pro-life professionals and our salary is very small in the United States. And that was amazing that she gave of herself in that way. Here in India, it is much more common to provide free medical care. In the United States, very uncommon. Everything costs, and it costs a lot. Right? And so, I mean, it would have been the equivalent of maybe, 100,000 rupees to get this care. And she gave it for just one 15-minute consultation. And she gave it to us for free. It was amazing. But there is a problem. The problem with level 3 is that human beings don't just desire some truth, some love, some fairness. We want absolute, unconditional, perfect, flawless, and eternal truth, love, justice, beauty, and home. We want it absolutely and perfectly. And when we don't get it perfectly, we are unsatisfied. We are disappointed. Raise your hand if you do not desire perfect love. You really don't want to be loved perfectly. I can speak to the most secular audience of atheists in the United States, and I maybe will get one hand that will raise. Everyone wants absolute truth, all the answers to all the questions, right? All the correct answers to all the questions, perfect justice, flawless beauty. Right? And you can see this, if you look, you can see this in the lives of children too. And we get disappointed and frustrated when we don't get it, right? You can take a look at the lives of children. This is my niece, her name is Susanna, and she knows she is a princess. She's so beautiful, she knows it. And every little girl seems to have this sense, without being taught, that she is beautiful, that she is a princess, right? We identify as little girls with Disney princesses, right? We know that we are supposed to be treated like a princess, and when we don't, we get angry, we get frustrated. One day I was watching Susanna playing in a bedroom. I was visiting her family, and she didn't know I was watching. And she was stroking this dress she had on, and she had this crown she put on her head, and makeup, she made a big mess with makeup, and she had her mother's high heel shoes on, and she was stroking this scarf, and she was saying, I'm the princess, and you're the prince, and you have to marry me. The desire to be perfectly, unconditionally loved is present in a 4-year-old. Where did she get that from? God, who distinctly tells each one of us we are made for Him. Right? That was when I noticed sitting in the other corner of the room was my nephew, Aaron. And Aaron was clutching a toy fire engine to his chest. And he said, I don't want to marry you. And she said, you don't have a choice. I am a princess, and you are the prince, and you have to marry me. Right? Unconditional. And he says, I don't like marrying you. Because he knows what happens. There's a phone call. There we go. I rejected it. Sorry. He knows what happens when you marry Susanna, right? What happens? You get bossed around a lot, right? So he says, I don't like marrying you. She says, don't you know that if you don't get married, you can't ever grow up? Oh, he doesn't like that idea. He wants to win this competition. So he says, well, I can't marry you right now because I have to figure out how this truck works first. So Susanna is not going to be disappointed and frustrated in her expectation that Aaron loved her unconditionally. So she gets off the bed and she puts her fists on her hips and she shakes her hair and she says, oh, for heaven's sakes, give me that truck. I'll show you how it works. And she bends over to grab it, and he puts the truck up to stop her, and it bonks her right on the head, and she runs off screaming, and he starts crying, and I'm thinking this marriage is not going to last very long. What was the problem? Should I have done this as a solution? Should I have said, Susanna, you are desiring to be loved perfectly and unconditionally, and you will never have perfection. So you must purge yourself of that desire because it does not exist. And if you continue to expect it, you will have dashed expectations. So get rid of it and settle for the humanness of the world. No, don't do that. Don't do that to yourselves, and don't do that to others. Because you will still have the desire for perfection. It will not go away. It will simply be frustrated. Instead, I said, Susanna, you are a princess. You are the daughter of a king. A great king, the greatest king of all. Your father is God in heaven, and you should be loved unconditionally. The mistake you made was that you thought that a conditioned source could fulfill your unconditional desire. Aaron is 4 years old. Uh-oh. This guy is persistent, I will tell you. Aaron cannot fulfill you perfectly. Right? Only God can. And that change made all the difference in the world. No more was there this conflict. So what do we do? Here's another one. Juliet, my daughter, wanting perfect, Elizabeth, when she was 2-3 years old, she wanted perfect justice. Her uncle gave them this new horse for Christmas. They both jumped on it. Juliet is the bigger one. She's trying to kick Elizabeth off, saying, it's mine, I saw it first. Right? Elizabeth knows that is unjust. You can see her. She's just about to reach down and tip over the horse, because she knows that Juliet is strapped to the horse and is going to fall over with the horse and get hurt, right? The sense of injustice is deep. Beauty, we want flawless beauty. What woman here is not aware of every single flaw in your face? We know it. We see it, right? We hate it. We try to perfect it with makeup because we care about flawless beauty. Even at a young age, at 4 years old, every girl knows how to do that. We all desire flawless beauty. And perfect home, absolute home. There's my mother when I was young, and she's there trying to bring the family into the picture. This is our family picture. And there I am, already wanting to go off and start something new, right? We want a perfect home, but we can't build it. Here is my point. All human beings desire perfect, unconditional, infinite, absolute truth, love, justice, beauty, and home. And we cannot get it from this world. This world will disappoint us, and our expectations will be dashed. And so we can do one of two things. We can either despair, or we can make the logical conclusion that perfect, absolute, infinite truth, love, justice, beauty, and home really does exist. And it isn't me, and it isn't you, it's God. That's who He is. And only He can fulfill me in that way. All right. So what does this have to do? Let me pass through some of these that I have for the longer session. What does this have to do with my mission as a pro-life advocate? The way that we define happiness will determine how you define success, quality of life, love, suffering, what you think is ethical versus unethical, what you think freedom means, what you believe about the human person, what a person is, human rights, and what is the common good. One little mistake about happiness will have profound consequences in the way we interpret these words. Take a look at this. Success. A human being living for level 1 is going to believe that the successful life is the life that has acquired many material possessions. Money, a house, clothing, food, right? These things are what make me successful. And when I am not achieving what I believe I ought to be achieving materially, I will feel unsuccessful. And so a man and a woman who marry and then discover they are pregnant, but have not yet achieved a certain degree of material wealth will now go for an abortion on the grounds that they are not yet ready for the child. And this interpretation of level 1 as their meaning in life completely overlooks the fact that the child is an opportunity for something far greater than material possessions, an opportunity for love, for compassion, for self-sacrifice, for generosity, for imparting truth, for building a home, for teaching justice, for showing beauty, for creating beauty. And we miss that when we encourage someone to have an abortion because they are poor. Instead of saying, let me help you make sure you have the material needs that you need to survive. But beyond that, you don't need much. You don't need much to have a family. When I was growing up, my family was poor. We didn't have much. We relied on the church to give us our clothes, our coats. We relied on our neighbors sometimes to give us food. We had to go to our neighbor's house to pick the pecan nuts off the tree so that we would have some nuts to eat sometimes. And there were 6 of us. But we were happy because we had what we needed. We didn't have what our neighbors had, but we had what we needed. It's very important that we help our culture understand material belongings are good, they are important, but they should never be our end. What about the way we view quality of life? Somebody who is living for happiness level 2, ego gratification, power, control, independence, competitiveness, achievement, success, and then that person discovers they are going to have a baby with a disability, a handicap. They will believe that this child will have a low quality of life, which completely overlooks the fact that this child with a disability could live a very high quality of life if only that child had someone to tell them that you are worth more than your achievement, your success, your independence, your power, your control. These things that in the end don't really make us happy anyway. Right? And yet we trick ourselves into believing, oh, how can you bring a child into the world who will have a low quality of life? What do you mean by quality of life? What do you mean by that? There's a sickness in our soul that teaches us that somebody who is poor, someone who is disabled, someone who is disadvantaged, right, is going to have a low quality of life. Their life will have a low quality when we judge them as having no worth. Take a look at the way we define love. Right? What does love mean? In happiness level 1, love means love me, admire me. Right? And so in the United States we have this common phrase, every child a wanted child. And if a child is not wanted, then you should have an abortion. But what is that really saying? Love is you being in my life at the right time. It's about me, not about you. Right? If you're not in my life at the wrong time, and I don't want you, then I can't really love you. But to a level 3 or level 4 person, love means giving myself to you regardless of the sacrifice that it requires. Where doing the good for you is just as easy, if not easier, than doing the good for myself. We would never say, if a child is unwanted, abort it. We would say, if a child is unwanted, help figure out why the parents don't want the child, and help them to see the beauty in that child. And if they still cannot see the beauty, then give the child to me, and we will take care of that child. That's a culture that becomes a level 3, level 4 culture. I want to pass through some of these. Have you heard of this man? You've seen him before. This is Nick Vujicic. And Nick Vujicic was born without any arms and legs. And there are many who say that he would have a low quality of life. Right? He was born in Australia, and his mother took thalidomide when he was in the womb, which people in those days believed would solve nausea, morning sickness. But they didn't know that it also caused severe birth defects. And so this is what happened. And one of his messages is this when he speaks to people. You think I have a low quality of life because I have no arms and legs. I don't need arms and legs to love you. You have arms and legs, but you do not know how to love. And so your quality of life is so much less than it could be. And he will tell these audiences, I love you. You are valuable. And these students will just cry because they've never really been told that before. And they will come up to him and he will hug them without arms. Have you seen him do that? He kind of wraps his shoulders around them. Because he knows love is deeper than your arms and your legs. This is an advertisement from Planned Parenthood, one of the biggest pro-abortion providers of abortion in the world. And they do millions of abortions every year, and they make billions of dollars off of abortion. And they have this advertisement up on big billboards in the United States. And they say, love carefully. What does Planned Parenthood mean by that? Do they mean be full of care for the other when you love? No. They mean be cautious when you love. And don't give away too much of yourself. Don't sacrifice yourself too much, because you might get a sexually transmitted disease. You might have a baby, and then you're going to have a smelly mess on your hands, and you will lose out on your career, your education, your opportunities. Love carefully. What an empty promise that is. Why would we do that? Right? What is the trade-off? I have smelly diapers in my home. My refrigerator is a mess, right? My bathroom is a mess because I never get a chance to clean it. There's clothes everywhere. I have to shorten my mission so that now I am homeschooling my children, right? I bring them with me where I go, and it makes the opportunity for my service less because I have my children with me and I need to take care of them now. But the trade-off, if I had aborted them, would have been I would have missed the purpose of my whole mission, which is to give myself pouring out in love to the mysterious opportunity that presents itself in every human being, including my own children. And freedom. What does freedom mean? To someone who is living for happiness level 1 and 2, freedom means having all my options open all the time and being able to choose anything I want whenever I want, regardless of the consequences. But that's freedom. Because in level 1, it's all about getting more stuff, and in level 2, it's about getting ahead. And if you restrict my choices and my options, you may make it impossible for me to do that. And so if you really believe in freedom, you would never have a law against abortion. To which I would say, well, then you really can't have a law against rape, because rape restricts the choices that men make with their bodies. Every law we have restricts choices in some way, and we do it for the common good. So this idea that freedom is having all your choices and never telling someone you cannot have a choice ends up really being slavery to a world that will become anarchy. Freedom in happiness level 3 and 4 is very different. It says true freedom is what makes me able to pursue what is really worthy of me. Right? So real freedom are rules and laws and obligations that move me, that encourage me to do the good for the other. That's freedom. Laws that tell me not to drink alcohol and drive. That's a good law because it sets me free to do no harm, right? To take care of other people. The same thing about the law on abortion. But let's take a look at this. Right? Here's what happens when you have all your options open to you all the time. Right? Some choices are deadly. When I was in the United States a few months ago, I had a debate at a university in front of about 1,000 students. And I was debating a man who was an abortionist. And after the debate, a young girl came to the microphone to ask a question. And she said, well, I appreciate your perspective on happiness, but here's what I think happiness is. She said, I think happiness is being able to do whatever I want with my body and have sex with whoever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want, however I want, regardless of the consequences, and you can't do anything to stop me. And the whole crowd cheered. And what could you do? I said the only thing that I could. When it died down, I said, well, I appreciate that you were willing to tell me that, but I want to encourage you to think about something. It's easy to say that when you have 1,000 people cheering for you. But when you go home and you're all alone and you realize what you just said about your body, about the meaning of your life, I hope you will reconsider, because I think you are worth more than that. You are worth sacrificing all of that for the good of others. Right? It's one little mistake about the meaning of life. And so I'm going to move now into where this goes. When somebody is living for happiness level 1 and happiness level 2, they will not believe in principles. Right? Principles don't matter. What is a principle? Does anybody tell me what a principle is? What is a principle?
right? Like you have principles of math, there are principles of science, right? There are principles in philosophy, principles of logic. What is a principle? Yeah, it's like a rule. It's a rule. It's a foundational, it's a basic foundational rule upon which other activities are based or other actions are based. Okay? But in level 1 and 2, we really don't believe in principles because principles get in the way of getting what I want. So the only principles that matter are my principles, and we each make up our own principles, right? And your principles are your principles, and mine are mine. But to a level 3 and level 4 person, they would say, that's not a good idea. We have to have some basic principles that we all live of harming one another, and that will undermine our level 3, level 4 purpose in life. And so it's critical if we want to build a pro-life culture to move people to level 3 and 4 so that they will believe in principles. And here are the principles that I believe we need to teach in your culture as well as mine. One of the first questions people have is the unborn child a human person? Because if it's not, then the argument on happiness levels doesn't matter because it's not a person anyway, right? So there is no harm. So is it a human person? Well, let's look at some principles. Okay? There's a difference between objective definitions and subjective definitions. If we're going to define a human being, a human person, we need to understand the difference between an objective definition and a subjective definition. Objective means to allow the thing to reveal its own nature to me, okay? So that I will observe it, understand it, and get a definition that is as full as possible according to its own nature. A subjective definition is me imposing my values on it so that I decide what it is. Okay? So for example, I can have an objective belief that mayonnaise is bad because I hate mayonnaise. But you may like mayonnaise, so for you, mayonnaise is good. That's subjective. And when we're dealing with our likes and dislikes about personal tastes, subjective definitions are okay, they're important. But when you're dealing with what something is by nature, a subjective definition is very dangerous, and you don't want to make that mistake. We actually have to teach this in colleges in the United States because students are not given this basic education in primary philosophy. This is pi. It's the symbol of the circumference of a circle divided by its diameter, right? And it has a really inconvenient decimal point equivalent of 3.14159265, and it goes on forever. Well, in the late 1800s, there was a debate in the Indiana state legislature in the United States where the legislators were actually debating to pass a law that would require that every teacher would have to teach that pi is rounded up to a nice even 3.2. They didn't have calculators, very difficult to deal with all those numbers after the decimal point. This would be much easier. Things would be more standard, consistent. Fortunately, there was a mathematician in the crowd, and he stood up and said, you cannot do this, because if you are an engineer and you use this new number when you are making your calculations while building a bridge, it will collapse. Buildings will collapse. Pi is an objectively occurring number, and to not acknowledge its objective nature has consequences. This is potassium cyanide. You may have a strong belief that potassium cyanide is good for you. It will help you achieve the heights of your meaning and your purpose. And if you take potassium cyanide, you will become a better, more fulfilled person. But your belief doesn't matter, because potassium cyanide is an objective reality. If you take it, it will kill you, no matter what your beliefs. There is an objective reality to who we are as human beings. And we need to discover what that reality is. Because if we don't define human beings well, we will harm them. And we have done it in the past, when we said that women were not persons based on their gender, and women were harmed. When we said that Africans were not persons because of the color of their skin, and they were enslaved and tortured and killed. When we said that Native Americans were not persons based on their level of development, and it justified the Spanish conquistadors torturing and enslaving thousands of people on those grounds. We cannot have subjective definitions. So how do we avoid these arbitrarily imposed definitions? We discover through principles of logic. What is the human person? The first principle of logic is called the principle of non-contradiction. In the United States, it is very common to hear the argument, it's a baby if you want it to be and it's not if you don't. And I have heard this argument in my travels throughout India already in the last month. This defies the most basic principle of logic. And if we do this, if we allow people to get away with making this mistake, it threatens the foundation of law, because laws cannot be built on contradictions. Something cannot be both X and not X at the same time, at the same place, in the same respect. It either is or is not, right? Modi is either dead or alive. He cannot be both at the same time. Queen Elizabeth is either alive or dead. Camille Pauley is either alive or dead. I cannot be both. Now, you may not know the exact moment when death occurs, right? I might be barely alive or almost dead. But at any particular moment, I am either alive or dead. I cannot be both, because the conditions of deadness exclude the conditions of aliveness. So you cannot have a baby, not baby, at the same time, at the same place, in the same substance, depending on two people looking at it. It defies the principle of logic. So how do you know whether or not the unborn child is a human being? This principle, one of the most basic principles of logic, which originated in Aristotle 2,400 years ago. It's called the principle of reasonable public corroboration. And it teaches that the best definition is the one that has objective evidence that other people can verify. So if you want to prove something and have your definition accepted, give me evidence. Make it evidence that I can see and understand, and make sure you don't leave anything out. Include as much data as possible. And that's important to you as doctors. You want to diagnose an illness, you need to collect all the data, or you might misdiagnose somebody. So it's important to collect all the data. Another way of stating this principle is arbitrarily asserted, arbitrarily denied. If you arbitrarily say, it's a baby, well, then I can arbitrarily say, well, it's not. Well, why? Because I feel it. Well, I feel opposite. That doesn't get you anywhere. We need evidence, hard, objective evidence. And in fact, in the late 1970s, a French geneticist by the name of Dr. Jérôme Lejeune discovered the full human genetic code present in an unborn child at the moment of fertilization, the moment the sperm fused with the egg. You have a unique, new, full, complete human genetic code. And so opponents to abortion, or advocates of abortion, will sometimes say, yes, but your toenail cell has the full human genetic code, and your hair cell has the full human genetic code. Are you going to say that those are human persons as well? No, your toenail cell has your human genetic, your DNA. It's part of your body. But at the moment of fertilization, the unborn child has a unique, individual, independent, full human genetic code. It's not the same as the mother's. It's not the same as the father's. It's different. And logically speaking, that means you have a unique being of human origin, a new human being. It's just logical. And you have all the evidence present to you. And if you don't like Dr. Jérôme Lejeune's conclusions, you can create your own DNA sequencer and you would come up with the same results. Right? Objective fact. And almost every medical textbook now acknowledges that a new human being comes into existence at the moment of fertilization, because you cannot really deny it. So now the abortion movement has moved to a different argument. They will say, okay, but it's not a human person. What are they doing here? They are separating human being from human person. How can you be a human being but not a human person? Right? It seems impossible. But the word personhood identifies your moral value, your moral worth, right? And that defines your legal protectability. If you are morally valuable, then you have legal protection under the law. And so persons have legal protection, right? And so they're arguing there can be a being of human origin that is not morally valuable and not legally protectable under the law. So then my argument is, well, then, wait a minute. Can I give this back to you? What is it that makes you morally valuable and legally protectable? What is it? And sometimes they will answer, well, being independent of the mother. When you're dependent on the mother, you're not a person. Really? So independence makes us morally valuable and legally protectable? That's interesting, because my first question would be, when do we become independent of our mothers? It isn't at birth. I have a 9-year-old and she still isn't independent of me. If I left her alone in my kitchen for 2 weeks, she would starve to death. She doesn't even know how to open a can yet. Right? So when do we ever become independent of one another? I'm dependent on you when you graduate and become doctors to save my life from diseases we would otherwise die of. I'm dependent on farmers. I'm dependent on people to build a house so I don't get snowed on in Seattle and die of the elements, right? You're dependent on fans so you don't die of the heat. You need a fan vendor to sell you the fans, right? We're dependent on one another all the time. But my second point is this. I said, well, wait a minute. If independence is what makes you morally valuable, does that mean that what we hold as our highest value is being independent of everyone? Because I would argue from level 3 and level 4, that's the opposite of the meaning of your life. We need our dependency on one another because that's where love comes from. You cannot achieve love if we are all independent. I don't need you. I am an island unto myself. I can self-sustain. I have no needs. I am perfect. Right now you have Nazi Germany. Right? The perfect race of perfect people who don't have any vulnerable, weak people, and so they never know how to love. We need needy people. We need weak people. Every patient you will encounter calls you to your true purpose, which is to love and to sacrifice and to give. And we are going to say that the most important part of our nature, which is our dependence on one another, which brings love into the world, that makes us not morally valuable and legally protectable. So then they will say, okay, well that's fine. It's brain waves. You have to have your nervous system has to be fully developed, right? You have to have brain waves. So, well, okay, first of all, brain waves are detectable at 40 days after conception, right? And many abortions happen after that point. But even before that point, why brain waves? Why is that what makes you morally valuable? Because sometimes some people use their brain waves to do evil things. Is that morally valuable? It's not just your brain waves that make you valuable. It's the fact that you have the potential to use your brainwaves to do good. Does an unborn child at the moment of fertilization have the potential, someday have the potential to use brainwaves to do good? As much as you and I do. And then they will say, oh, but it's just a potential, right? He doesn't have a brain yet, and so it's not formed enough yet, and so he's only a potential person. Okay. But what about when you are under the effects of anesthesia? Right? You aren't capable of using your brainwaves to do good in the world. You have the potential. Does that mean you are just a potential person when you are under the influence of anesthesia? Or when you are asleep? Or when you are doing evil? Or when you are vegging in front of the television? It isn't the act of goodness and love that makes us valuable. What makes you valuable and legally protectable is that every one of you has the potential in your future to do great good, great love, and that potential is valuable right now. And if it's true for you, it's true for the unborn child, because he has just as much potential as you have. And if it isn't true, then watch out, because now people are going to judge your moral worth in terms of what you are doing and how much you are accomplishing. And then we have this principle. How do you define what a human person is? The best explanation is the one that accounts for the most data. Right? Look at all the data. What is a human being? Don't just say, it's got to have arms and legs. Don't say, oh, it's got to have brain waves. Don't just use some physical, functional, material reality. What's the full definition of a human person? Here's my argument. A human person is any being of human origin who finds its proper end, its fulfillment, in the fulfillment of its transcendent desires. What does that mean? A human person is any being of human origin that has the potential in its future to achieve happiness level 3 and happiness level 4. That's a human person. And it's morally valuable and should be legally protectable. And this is the message we need to share with people. Which opens up a whole bunch of questions, doesn't it? Because now people will say, oh, Well, if that's your definition of human personhood, well then, you know, if that's what it means to be a person, then every egg and every sperm is a human person, because every egg has the potential to achieve happiness level 3 and level 4. But it doesn't. You don't see little communities of eggs building churches and orphanages and hospitals, right? They don't have the potential. If the egg does not get fertilized by the sperm, it just gets sloughed out of the body, and that's it. But that new fertilized egg has that potential. How do I know? Watch it. I once debated in front of a class at the University of California at Berkeley, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. And there were 700 college students, and they were all pro-abortion. It's a very liberal school. Most of them were atheists, and they were all pro-abortion, and they were very rowdy. And I was debating an abortionist by the name of Dr. Malcolm Potts. And I asked him, is there ever a point at which you stop doing abortions? And he said, yes, I don't do abortions when the nervous system is fully developed, because at that point, you know, I believe there is full human potential now, and there's value, and so we shouldn't do abortion. As medical students, you probably know when the nervous system is fully developed. I asked these 700 college students at Berkeley if they knew, and they were guessing 3 months, 16 weeks after conception, trying to guess. I said, no. Your nervous system is not fully developed until you are somewhere around 22, 24 years old. Which means Dr. Potts believes that every one of you should be legally aborted because you have no moral worth or value. It was the first time during the entire debate you could have heard a pin drop. I'm like, wait, what? Is she serious? And Dr. Potts didn't have anything to say. You know, he's a medical doctor. He didn't know this. I'm like, well, you're going to have to change your position, dude. Right? Here's my point. We cannot use arbitrary biological markations to define our value, our meaning in life. We have to move beyond that. Sometimes people bring up the case of life of the mother, right? What about when the life of the mother is in danger? Then what do? Can abortion be allowed in that circumstance? Well, if we are level 3, level 4 people, and we want to build a system of ethics based on level 3 and 4 principles, then you have to acknowledge that even when the mother's life is in danger, you have 2 patients. The child is a unique, intrinsically valuable, morally valuable, and should be legally protectable human being. You can't change that just because the mother's life is in danger. As much as you might like to, you cannot change objective fact. So what do? Well, in Catholic medical philosophy, Catholic medical ethics, I will present to you what the Catholic faith is. In this case, if you truly have a circumstance where the presence of the unborn child is going to cause the death of the mother imminently, right, then you can take an action. Okay? But it needs to be imminent, because your objective otherwise will be to get the baby to the point where he is viable. If her death is not imminent, right, going to happen right away, then you should be morally required and legally required to get the mother to the point where the child is viable and you can safely deliver the child, right? But what if that's not the case? What if she's going to die imminently unless you do something? First of all, you should be learning that that is very, very rare. One of my best friends is Dr. Sue Rutherford, who is an OBGYN perinatologist at Evergreen Health Systems near Seattle, Washington. She has practiced her medicine for 30 years, only caring for pregnant mothers who are very sick, or their babies, unborn babies who are very sick. And in 30 years of practice, she only had 1 case in which she had to terminate the pregnancy prior to viability, which resulted in the death of the child. Only once. And it was because of severe hypertension, where the mother was experiencing the hypertension because of the pregnancy, and it was going to kill her. So she had to deliver the child early, and the child was not able to sustain life outside the womb. Did she commit an immoral abortion? And the Catholic Church would say no, she didn't, because she took the first step that was necessary to save both lives. If the mother dies, the baby will die too. They are both in a pathological situation. And so to remove the baby is the first step to save the child's life as well. The child was non-viable. We could not save the child's life. It was a secondary and unintended consequence that the child died. Same thing would be true with an ectopic pregnancy, right, where the baby is lodged in a fallopian tube. And if you don't remove the child, you'll have internal hemorrhaging, and the mother will, could die, and the baby will certainly be lost. what the church teaches right now is that you can remove the section of the tube that the baby is in, right? But what doctors often want to do is, instead of removing that section of the tube and sewing it back, they want to inject the baby's body with a drug that will dissolve the baby so it can be flushed out of the tube, and the reason why is to protect her fertility. My sister had this instance, and she refused to let the doctor use the drug because she said it would be better that I died than that you actually kill my child. Okay? And he said, but if we use the procedure you want, you won't ever have children again. And she said, it would be better that I not have any children in the future than that I kill the child that I have now. Point number 1, women can be courageous. Women can be heroic. Women can have unconditional love. Women can understand the concept that we can do a noble thing by giving our own lives for our children. Don't count out this option from women. Right? We need to be moved by compassion and empathy that says, I will do whatever it takes, even kill your child, to help you out of this dilemma. But what about the possibility that this woman could do a noble act? Not only that, but putting that aside, we are able to solve the problem without her having to die. So the doctor removed the section of the tube, sewed it back together, and said, because of that, the scarring in your tube, you won't conceive again. And she went on to have 2 more healthy children. Okay? So you know this. Doctors are not gods. You know that. But in America, they think they are. They think they are gods, right? And they aren't. So I just want to leave you with this, because I think my time's up. I just want to leave you with this last thought. You're going to be doctors, and you're going to be healers. And what you are going to do, in my opinion, is one of the greatest professions in the world. Behind only priests, right? The religious, those who are leading us to God, right? Behind only that. And mothers and fathers, right? Those to me would be the height. And then there would be these doctors, but not just doctors of the body. Don't be afraid to be doctors of the soul, to encourage people to live for something greater. At least try that first, and you might be surprised at the heroism and the courage and the nobility that you will see in men and women who otherwise would give up because you gave up. Don't give up. Build a culture of life. And I think that you can reverse this trend in your culture, as we have been trying so hard in mine. So please pray for me, and I will pray for your ministry. God bless you. I don't know if you had questions or